It's a sunny day in California. On May 7th, 1972, Marianne Pesce, 18 years old, and her good friend Anita Lucchesa, also 18 years old, are hitchhiking and are picked up on an interstate on-ramp. They open the door and are greeted by a friendly face. They jump in. Little do they know, this was a terrible decision. We begin in the early life of that friendly face. Today's subject was born December 18th, 1948. His parents named him Edmund Emil Kemper III. Ed Kemper was born in sunny Burbank, California. He was the middle child of 3 children, and the only son of Clarnell Elizabeth Kemper and Edmund Emil Kemper Jr. Ed Kemper Jr. was a World War II veteran who, after the war, tested nuclear weapons at the Pacific Proving Ground before returning to California, where he worked as an electrician. Clarnell often complained about her husband's menial electrician job. Edmund Jr. later stated suicide missions in wartime and the atomic bomb testing was nothing compared to living with Clarnell. Edmund Kemper III was 13 pounds when he was born. Kemper was a head taller than his peers by the age of 4. Early on, Kemper exhibited antisocial behaviors, such as cruelty to animals, and at the age of 10, Kemper buried the family cat alive, then later came back to dig the cat up and decapitate it, and mount its head on a spike. Kemper later said he got great pleasure from deceiving his family about what had happened to the family cat. Later, the family got another cat, and it appeared to favor Kemper's younger sister over him, this making Kemper furious, and later when he was alone he killed the cat and kept pieces of it in his closet. Kemper's mother later found the remains of the cat and chastised him. Kemper was known for his dark and morbid imagination. In his youth he would perform rituals on his younger sister's dolls, which would lead to the beheading and dismemberment of said dolls. Kemper's older sister Susan would make fun of Kemper, asking why he did not try to kiss his teacher, and Kemper replied, "If I were to kiss her, I would have to kill her first." Kemper at a young age would sneak out of the family home with his father's bayonet and make his way to his second-grade teacher's home and watch her through the window. Kemper's older sister would often pick on him to almost life-ending levels. On one occasion, Kemper's older sister pushed him in front of a train and also into the deep end of a pool. It would seem that Kemper's tendencies ran in the family. Kemper had a great relationship with his father and was greatly affected by his parents' separation in 1957. Kemper was sent to live with his mother in Helena, Montana. To say that Kemper and his mother had a tumultuous relationship would be an understatement. Clarnell Kemper was known to be a neurotic, domineering alcoholic who would demean and abuse Kemper on a daily basis. Clarnell would often make Kemper sleep in a locked basement because she thought that Kemper would harm his sisters. Clarnell would also make fun of Kemper for his size. Kemper was 6'5" by the time he was 15. Kemper's mother would not show any affection towards him for fear of turning him gay, and would often say that he reminded her of his father, saying no woman would ever love him. Kemper would later run away from home to live with his father in Van Nuys, California, where he would learn that his father had remarried and now had a stepson. Kemper's father would allow him to stay for a short time, but would later send him to live with his grandparents on a ranch in the foothills of Sierra Nevada. Kemper hated living with his grandparents. He would describe them as senile, saying that his grandmother would constantly emasculate him and his grandfather. One afternoon, Kemper would have had enough of the emotional torture from his grandmother, and on August 27, 1964, at the age of 15, Kemper was sitting at the kitchen table with his grandmother when they had an argument. Enraged, Kemper stormed off and came back with a rifle that his grandfather had given him for hunting, and fatally shot his grandmother in the head before firing more shots into her back as she lay dying on the kitchen floor. Some accounts mention that she suffered multiple post-mortem stab wounds with a kitchen knife. Later, Kemper's grandfather would return from grocery shopping, where Kemper greeted him with the same rifle that had ended his wife's life not too long ago, and fatally shot him right next to his car. Not sure what to do, Kemper phoned his mother and told her what had happened, and she instructed him to call the police. Kemper did so and waited there for the police to show up. After his arrest, Kemper said, "Just wanted to see what it felt like to kill Grandma," and testified that he killed his grandfather so he would not have to find out that his wife was dead, because he would be angry with him for what he had done. Psychiatrist Donald Lund, who interviewed Kemper during adulthood, wrote in his way he had avenged the rejection of both his mother and father. Kemper's crimes were deemed schizophrenic. He was sent to Escatero State Hospital, a maximum security facility in San Luis County that houses mentally ill convicts. Kemper was imprisoned at Escudero in California. While there, a youth psychiatrist and a social worker disagreed with the findings of the court diagnosis. Their report stated that Kemper showed no expression of delusion or hallucinations and no evidence of bizarre thinking. They also observed him to be highly intelligent and introspective. Initial tests showed Kemper had a higher IQ than average. Testing showed it to be 136. Kemper also was re-diagnosed with a less severe condition, that being personality trait disturbance and passive-aggressive type. Later testing would also find his IQ to be closer to 145. Kemper grew close to a psychiatrist by being a model prisoner, and later trained to administer psychiatric tests to the other inmates. It would appear that Kemper was a great worker and a strong asset to the facility. It would appear that Kemper was not the typical sociopath. Kemper really took pride in his work. Later, Kemper would become a member of the JCs. On December 18, 1969, Kemper's 21st birthday, he would be released on parole against the recommendations of the psychiatrist at the hospital. Kemper was released in the care of his mother, who had previously remarried and taken the surname Strandberg, and later would divorce for the second time. At this time, Kemper's mother would reside in Aptos, California. Kemper's mother worked as an administrative assistant at UCSC, and Kemper would later demonstrate to a psychiatrist that he was rehabilitated, and on November 29, 1972, Kemper's juvenile record would permanently be expunged. While living with his mother, Kemper would attend community college in accordance with his parole requirements. Kemper had hopes of joining the police force, but later would be rejected due to his size. At this point, Kemper was standing at 6'9". Due to his height, Kemper would earn the nickname Big Ed. Although Kemper was rejected, he still maintained a good relationship with the local police. Kemper would, on regular occurrence, hang out in a local police hotspot, which was a bar named the Jury Room. Kemper worked a series of menial jobs before gaining employment with the state of California's Division of Highway. During this time, Kemper's relationship with his mother remained toxic and hostile, the two having frequent arguments that the neighbors would often overhear. Kemper would later describe the arguments he had with his mother. "My mother and I started right in on the horrendous battles, just horrible battles, violent and vicious. I've never been in such vicious verbal battles with anyone. It would go to fists with a man, but this was my mother, and I couldn't stand the thought of my mother and I doing these things. She insisted on it, and just over the stupid things. I remember one roof raiser was over whether I should have my teeth cleaned." When Kemper saved enough money, he would move out and live with a friend in Alameda, California. There he still complained of being unable to get away from his mother. Kemper's mother would make regular phone calls and pay surprise visits. Kemper would still struggle from time to time with his finances. As a result, he would have to move back with his mother. Kemper was in his early 20s around this time and would meet someone while he was at the beach. She was a student and her name remains unknown at this time due to her being 17. One day Kemper was driving and saw two young hitchhikers and figured he would give the two of them a ride. The hitchhikers' names were Pesce and Anita Lucchesa. As the two young ladies entered Kemper's car, Kemper would make a decision that would alter the three of their lives forever. Kemper would tell the two that he would take them to the Stanford University campus. After driving some time, Kemper would reach a secluded and heavily wooded area near Alameda, which Kemper was familiar with from working in the highway department. It would be there that Kemper would handcuff Pesce and lock Lucchesa in the trunk. Immediately after locking Lucchesa in the trunk, Kemper would apologize to Pesce for accidentally brushing against her breast. Kemper then threw a plastic bag over her head and wrapped a bathrobe belt around her neck. As Kemper pulled on the belt, it snapped. Meanwhile, Pesce had bitten through the plastic bag. Kemper then drew his knife and began to stab Pesce in the back, but the blows did not seem to have any effect. She began to twist around, facing Kemper. Kemper would state, "I stabbed her all over her back." She turned around and I stabbed her once in the side of her stomach. As she turned around, I could have stabbed her through the heart, but her breasts were there. Her breasts actually deflected me. I couldn't see myself stabbing a young woman in her breasts. That's embarrassing. So Kemper would grab Pesce by the chin and pull her head back and slit her throat. Kemper then went to the back of his car, opened the trunk, pulled Lucchesa out, and began to stab her repeatedly in the eyes, throat, heart, and forearms. Kemper recalled being surprised by how many heavy blows she took before losing consciousness. Once the women were slain, Kemper would drive their bodies back to his apartment and would carry them up the stairs. This is where the real gruesome acts would take place. Kemper would dissect their bodies, pulling out various internal organs, and would snap Polaroids of them, and would behead them. Kemper confessed, "I remember there was an actual sexual thrill. You hear a little pop, pull their head off and hold their head up by the hair, wiping the blood off their body sitting there, that'd get me off." But Kemper insisted there was absolutely no contact with improper areas. Kemper said, "I sit there looking at the heads on an overstuffed chair, looking at them, when one of them somehow became unsettled, comes rolling down the chair, very grisly, trampling down the chair, rolls across and hits the rug. Bonk. The neighbor downstairs hates my guts. I'm always making noise late at night. He gets his broom and whacks the ceiling. Buddy, I say, I'm sorry for that. Dropped my head. Sorry. That helped bring me out of depression. I would trip on that. Afterwards, Kemper put what remained of the two women into plastic bags and buried them in the Santa Cruz hills, their torsos and limbs in one location, their hands in another, disguising the burial grounds using techniques he had learned in the Boy Scouts. He kept their heads for a few days longer before throwing them into the ravine. Kemper also visited the graves of one of the Coeds, Pesce, because he wanted to be near her and talk to her. Kemper would go 4 months until he had the urge to kill again. One night on September 14th, 1972, while out for a drive, Kemper would spot a young woman hitchhiking, so he would take the opportunity and pull up next to her. The young woman's name was Aiko Ko. She was a 15-year-old student who had missed her bus to her dance class. As Kemper pulled up, he would put on the charm and seem as friendly as he could. With young Aiko feeling no danger, she would have a seat in Kemper's 1969 Ford Galaxy. As Kemper pulled off, he knew exactly what he was going to do, driving to another remote area where he pulled a gun. While in the heat of the moment, Kemper would accidentally lock himself out of the car, leaving the gun in the car. Akiko had the opportunity to save herself, but being young and scared, she would make a grave mistake by letting Kemper back in the car where he would proceed to choke her unconscious and then rape her. After Kemper finished his depraved act, he would pack Akiko's body into the trunk of his car. Kemper would stop by a nearby bar to have a drink. After spending some time at the bar, Kemper would go to leave, stopping at the trunk of his car to look at what he did, like he was admiring a catch, like a sport fisherman. Kemper would return home with Akiko's body and would have sexual intercourse with the corpse, dismembering and disposing of the remains in a similar manner to his previous victims. Akiko's mother would begin to be concerned about her daughter's whereabouts. Thus, she would call the police and report a missing person. While the police were investigating the whereabouts, young Akiko's mother would put up hundreds of flyers. Kemper would go another 4 months without killing, but the urge would hit him again like a junkie needing another fix. And on January 7th, 1973, he would strike again. While driving around Cabrillo College campus, Kemper would pick up another co-ed, 18-year-old Cindy Shaw. Kemper would drive to another wooded area and fatally shoot her with a .22 caliber pistol. It would seem that Kemper had perfected his method for killing these young women. Kemper then placed Cindy's body into the trunk of his car and would drive back to his mother's home. At this point, Kemper had moved back with his mother. There, Kemper would keep the body of Cindy in his closet overnight. The next morning came, and as Kemper's mother left to go to work, Kemper, with all of the excitement of a child running down the stairs on Christmas morning, would pull the body of Cindy out of the closet, would begin to have intercourse with the corpse. After Kemper had his fill, he would pull the bullet out of the body and would begin the ritual of dismembering the body. But this time he would do it in his mother's bathtub. It would appear to be a sneaky way of getting back at his mother for all the years of wrongdoings. Kemper would keep Cindy's severed head for days, regularly engaging in irremagio with it. Then he would bury it in his mother's garden, facing upwards towards her bedroom. After being arrested, Kemper would state,
"That's when I started burying the heads in the backyard, right underneath Mom's bedroom window. Their faces looking right up at her window while she was at home, right under her nose, man. Couldn't help myself. I know it's silly, but Mom always liked people to look up to her."
Kemper would discard the rest of Cindy's remains over the course of a few weeks, throwing them off a cliff, all except for Cindy's head and right hand were ever recovered. A pathologist would later state Cindy was cut into pieces with a power saw. Kemper's lust for violence would prove too strong, and on February 5th, 1973, Kemper would be on the prowl for his next victim. Kemper would be extremely angry due to a heated argument he had with his mother. Now at this time, fear had gripped the local community. With a serial killer on the loose, the local colleges had instructed the students not to hitchhike, but if they had to hitchhike, only go with someone who had a campus sticker. Kemper was able to obtain a sticker through his mother due to her working on campus, so needless to say, unsuspecting student would fall right into the trap, just like an insect to a fly trap. While out driving, Kemper would spot two young students, 23-year-old Rosalind Thorpe and 20-year-old Alice Lau, on the USC campus. Kemper would state that Rosalind would reassure Alice that it was okay to enter the car. Kemper would follow his now normal ritual and drive to a wooded area and shoot both Rosalind and Alice, but this time he would behead them in his car, then drive back to his mother's house and carry their headless corpse up the stairs to have intercourse with them. Kemper would remove the bullet so there would be no trace back to him. He would dismember the bodies and discard the remains the next morning. Some remains were found at Eden Canyon a week later. More were found near Route 1 on March 1973. Later, when Kemper was interviewed, he was asked, "Why decapitate the victims?" And this is what he had to say. "The head trip fantasy was a bit like trophies. You know, the head is where everything is at. The brains, the eyes, the mouth. That's the person. I remember being told as a kid, you cut off the head and the body dies. The body is nothing after the head is cut off. Well, That's not quite true. There's a lot in the girl's body without the head. While sleeping, Kemper was awoken by his mother returning home from a party. The date was April 20th, 1973, just 1 month removed from his last crime. After Kemper's mother had settled down for the night while reading a book, Kemper would enter her room, standing in the doorway. His mother would condescendingly say,
"Oh, I suppose you're going to want to sit up all night and talk now." Shit. I looked at her, I said no. I said good night. And I knew I was going to kill her.
Kemper would go back to his room and wait for his mother to fall asleep. Some time passed and Kemper would re-enter his mother's room with a claw hammer. He would proceed to beat his mother to death. Then he would slit her throat with a penknife. One could only guess how Kemper was feeling at the moment where the antagonist of Kemper's life story lay dead on the floor, as the compulsion to remove his own mother's head rushed through Kemper's body. I'm sure there was a smile on Kemper's face. After removing his mother's head, Kemper placed the head on a shelf where he would scream at it for an hour. Once he got bored of that, he would throw darts at the head. When Kemper was done, he would remove his mother's tongue and larynx and put them in the garbage disposal, but they spat them out. Kemper would hide his mother's body in the closet. Feeling accomplished, he would go for a beer at a nearby bar. Upon returning home, Kemper phoned his mother's best friend to come over for dinner and a movie. 59-year-old Sarah Howlett would arrive shortly after the phone call, and Kemper would subsequently strangle Sarah to death. There was no mention of mutilation of Sarah's corpse. Kemper would place Sarah's body in a closet and make sure there was no signs of disturbance, but Kemper would leave a note to the police that read, "Approximately 5:15 a.m. Saturday. No need for her to suffer anymore at the hands of a horrible murderous butcher. It was quick, asleep the way I wanted it, not sloppy and incomplete. Gents, just a lack of time. I got things to do." Afterwards, Kemper fled the scene. He drove non-stop to Pueblo, Colorado, taking caffeine pills to stay awake for the over 1,000-mile journey. He had 3 guns and hundreds of rounds of ammunition in his car, and he believed he was the target of an active manhunt. After not hearing any news on the radio about the murders of his mother and her best friend, Sarah, he would phone the police and confess to the murders of his mother and Sarah. But the police did not take the call seriously and told him to call back at a later time. Hours would pass and Kemper would call asking to speak to an officer that he personally knew. Kemper would confess to the officer about the killings of his mother and friend. Kemper waited for the police to take him into custody. Upon capture, Kemper also confessed to the murders of the 6 students. When asked in a later interview why he turned himself in, Kemper said, "The original purpose was gone. It wasn't serving any physical or real emotional purpose. It was just a pure waste of time, emotionally. I couldn't handle it much longer. Towards the end there, I started feeling the folly of the whole thing, and at the point of near exhaustion, near collapse, I just said the hell with it and called it off." On November 8th, 1973, a 6-man and 6-woman jury deliberated for 5 hours before declaring Kemper sane and guilty of all counts. Kemper would ask for the death penalty, requesting death by torture. However, with a moratorium placed on capital punishment by the Supreme Court of California, he instead received 7 years to life for each count, with these terms to be served congruently, and was sentenced to California Medical Facility in Vacaville. My own personal thoughts. I'm no professional psychiatrist or a profiler, but in my opinion, it would seem the Coed murders wouldn't have happened if Kemper would have started with his mother. But hindsight is always 20/20. Let me know what you think in the comments.